Alright, you guys, this episode of Paradigm Profiles is called From Norteno to Marine. This profile is a story about the short and turbulent life of an individual by the name of Andres Raya. Raya was a native of Stanislaus County and grew up on the streets of Modesto. He was born on April 17, 1985, and at least during the years when he was an adolescent, he lived somewhat of a normal life. Raya's mother and father were considered to be good church-going people. They worked hard to provide for Raya, and they tried fervently to raise him to be an honest, stand-up type of person. For a brief time during his teenage years, he attended church regularly at St. Jude's Catholic Church in Ceres, California. He would also go to high school in Ceres at Central Valley High. During Raya's younger years, his father also pushed him to excel in sports. At one point, he had signed him up to take boxing lessons, and together they would go to a small boxing club in Modesto. At the time, Raya seemed to take an avid interest in sports and was always an extremely competitive and athletic kid. He enjoyed boxing and knew his father had deep aspirations to see him become a professional boxer. But Raya's passion became focused on the military and being a soldier for his country. For a brief time, he wrestled with the idea of enlisting in the army, as he always had visions of seeing himself on the ground, fighting in a conventional war. Boots on the ground in the trenches. Then he considered enlisting in the Air Force, as he always had an interest in being a fighter pilot. The fact that he was an 80s baby and Top Gun was a blockbuster hit in 1986 probably had something to do with it. But he would ultimately settle for joining the United States Marine Corps. In Raya's mind, the Marines represented strength and was a preface into manhood, becoming a man. But as Raya got into his later teens and started running around in the streets of Modesto, it didn't take long before he found himself running around with the wrong crowd. He started hanging out with a group of Norteños. This led to smoking weed, drinking beer, and fighting in the streets. There were times when Raya started staying out at all hours of the night, partying and not coming home until the next morning. His parents started to worry, like every other parents who've had a son or a daughter that gets involved with the wrong crowd, that they would eventually get that call late one night from a doctor or a law enforcement officer advising him that he was in the hospital, or even worse, that he was dead. Raya's father tried to intervene by attempting to spend more time with Raya, but this didn't work, as Raya just continued to gravitate to the streets. Although his dad had never been involved with gangs when he was younger himself, he knew enough about them to know that Raya was already to the point of imminent danger. One day when Raya was out running the streets, his dad went into his room and looked inside his closet. Almost his entire wardrobe consisted of red shirts, red sweatshirts, red shoes, red bandanas, red gloves, red beanies, and red baseball caps. There was also an extensive collection of Norteño rap CDs that included Woody, Northern Exposure, Speedy Lo, Big Tone, Toxtero, and others. Something else that caught his dad's eye was the fact that he found several switchblade knives along with a .38 revolver and a box of bullets. At that point that his dad knew that he was losing Raya to the streets, and that if he didn't push him to get enlisted in the military, that he was either going to end up in prison or even worse, dead. Once Raya enlisted in the Marines, his rank was Lance Corporal. He would end up serving one tour in Iraq. His MOS, military occupational specialty, or his regular job, consisted of being a motor transportation operator. These guys do what the job title suggests. They operate wheeled vehicles to transport cargo and personnel. This might not be the most high adrenaline or high profile job in the armed services, but motor transport operators play a key role in keeping the military moving and getting things from point A to point B and off the battlefield. Raya was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marine Regiment. This means his role was to supervise and operate wheeled vehicles over all types of terrain, and to safely transport cargo and provide advanced mobility on all missions. Raya would end up doing exceptionally well and received all kinds of commendations such as the National Defense Service Medal, the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, and the Navy Marines Corps Sea Service Deployment Ribbon. He was stationed at Camp Pendleton, which is located in North San Diego County in Southern California. It serves as the United States Marine Corps' prime amphibious training center based on the West Coast. It was after Raya's tour in Iraq and his time in the service that people began to see some serious changes within his character. Some of those that were the closest to him actually believed that he had developed severe cases of paranoia and PTSD. At times, he'd either start talking to himself or he'd start freaking out if the noise levels got too loud. This actually caused a lot of his friends to pull back as they began to think that he was deeply troubled and that his past wartime experiences were making him unpredictable. Some of his boys claimed that he started floating ideas about going to war with the local cops. For whatever reason, he seemed to believe that the cops were plotting against him and that they were out to get him. But nobody took him serious. People obviously just thought he was airing out his demons and that it would eventually all just come to pass. But on January 9, 2005, after returning home from Camp Pendleton, Raya's ominous thoughts apparently came to the surface. The paranoia, the PTSD, and whatever other type of mental deficiencies that were created from his wartime experiences were all about to explode like a powder keg. Although his mental state of mind was rearing itself and people knew he was like a walking time bomb, no one seen what was coming next. After falling deeper into what was said to be a manic depression, he apparently armed himself with an SKS military assault rifle because he seemed to think that the local police were shooting at him and that they were trying to kill him. The next phase of his plan included setting a trap for the police so that he could execute an ambush and take out as many as he could. After arming himself with the SKS, he threw on a multicolored poncho, believing that this would act as camouflage in the darkness. Next, he approached a liquor store in Ceres called George's Liquors. When Reyes walked into the liquor store, he approached the clerk and apparently asked a number of incoherent questions that the clerk described as being weird and odd. At that point, he ramped things up by going outside and firing off a couple of rounds in an effort to get the Ceres Police Department to respond. Next, he walked back into the store and told the clerk to call the police because he believed that he had been shot and that he had the backing of the military behind him, obviously referring to the Marines. The clerk ended up calling the Ceres Police Department, not because he believed that Riot had really been shot, but because he was worried about Riot's intentions and things were escalating fast. Dispatch put out a call to Sergeant Howard Stevenson and Officer Sam Rhino, who were in the general vicinity of the liquor store. Although both of these veteran officers had an extensive amount of experience, nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to encounter. They were not only outgunned by Riot's SKS military assault rifle, but they were about to pull up on a highly skilled military soldier who possessed a skill set that they wouldn't be no match against. Their service revolvers would basically be rendered useless if they were drawn into a gunfight with Riot. He'd be able to maintain distance with his long gun, so for them, any real chance of getting a shot off at that distance would have been solely based on luck. After Reyes came out of George's Liquors a second time, he took up a strategic position at one of the corners of the store. From this vantage point, the responding officers would be walking right into an ambush and wouldn't be able to approach him without exposing themselves with no cover. At that point, they didn't know he was armed with an SKS, so they stood at the corner of the tire shop adjacent to the liquor store. This was a mistake. Standing at the corner put nothing else except a plate glass window between them. Officer Rhino then asked Riot to show his hands. Riot refused. Instead, he flipped up the corner of his poncho, leveled the SKS, and fired at the corner of the window. This is when Riot's military training kicked in and he went into a tactical advance. He fired a volley of bullets at the window, striking Officer Rhino and barely missing Officer Milton. Riot then advanced while shooting in a semicircle pattern, which is a military tactic called slicing the pie. At this point, a third officer named John King arrived. King was actually a former military sergeant that was stationed in Fort Bragg himself. The officers were still outgunned, but firing multiple weapons actually caused Riot to pull back and take up a new position between two parked vehicles. This is when a fourth officer named Officer Howard Stevenson arrived from the opposite side of Riot and attempted to flank him. The only mistake Stevenson made, which was a fatal one, was not knowing what type of firepower he was up against. Raya had a modified SKS with armor-piercing bullets, also known as cop killers. This is when Raya used another military tactic called using suppression fire. He basically overwhelmed Officer Stevenson while advancing on him. Before Officer Stevenson could take cover, Raya moved closer, shooting him in the head twice at point-blank range. After killing Stevenson, Raya retreated into a dark alley and hunkered down for a couple of hours. During the time Raya was in the alley, law enforcement officers, including a SWAT tactical team, arrived and surrounded the area. During the final minutes of this confrontation, Raya scaled a fence without warning and attempted to ambush a group of officers who had set up a perimeter. This resulted in what many thought was Raya's overall objective, to go down by officer-assisted suicide. Family members of Raya's claim that he was not a hardcore gang member and that he died on his feet like a real man. Others claim that Raya didn't really experience any real hand-to-hand combat in the military, and that the extent of the action he witnessed involved being close to an IED, an improvised exploding device, when it exploded. Whatever you believe, the one thing that is clear is that the military veterans and those who volunteer their services to serve their country don't get the type of psychological care, medical care, or financial care that they deserve. Raya's family claimed that there were times when he just stared at a corner in a trance, and that he would at times wake up screaming. None of us have really experienced the psychological trauma that conventional wars like Iraq have on someone. Imagine huge bombs exploding around you for an extended periods of time and being so close that you can feel the concussion of the bombs exploding. Walking through minefields not knowing if the next step is going to blow your leg off. That's a lot to digest. War is a lot worse than some of us can imagine. It has deep-seated effects on people mentally, and sometimes you can never fully recover. I don't believe in some of the reasoning why we get pulled into conflicts, and I never will. But I still have an immense amount of respect for those men and women who step up and answer that call of duty. In closing, one can only wonder if something could have been averted to stop the events that took place on January 9th, 2005. Andres Raya and Howard Stevenson both lost their lives as their two worlds collided on a dark night in Ceres, California. There's all kinds of arguments that can be made when it comes to the culpability and accountability. Gun laws, the military, the government. I guess it depends on what you believe or who you ask. Meanwhile, while things still continue to be the same, there's no doubt that sooner or later, there will be another Andres Raya and history will repeat itself again. There's something wrong with the way we do things in the current days and times. Mass shootings are being carried out with regularity, and it doesn't even shock the conscience anymore. We've become so accustomed to it that that's a tragedy in itself. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. We're already working on getting the next one out to you guys, so look forward to dropping the next few days. And again, for those of you who have questions, drop them in the community section in any one of the comments and we'll find them. On that note, thank you for the support, for all the positivity, and for just sticking with us. We realize that without you, our viewers, we would cease to exist.